Tim.
Todd.
All right, man.
Oh, how are you doing, boss?
This is exciting.
It is. It is. My first time on IG Live.
Yeah, man. This is the way to go, man. So
Pretty-
I wanted to jump into it, man. Like for people that didn't hear the podcast, like maybe tell them who you are right quick.
I am Timothy E. Lewis, but I go by several aliases, most of them self-named. From Coast to Coast Tim to the Bull. The godfather of MMA analytics is a popular one because of the work that I do with my cutting edge data and MMA. And that's really where I am right now with Scraptitude. I'm doing a lot with pioneering data. We're working on expanding into the media sphere. And I'm just one of these analytical personalities that's blossoming through the concrete with this burgeoning sport.
So I wanted to get into you're doing fights by the numbers. Maybe you could just talk about the numbers for this instead of a lot of people give their opinions on where they think a fighter is.
Mm-hmm.
But let's kind of look at maybe the co-main and the main just by the numbers primarily.
Yeah, well, we like broad patterns at Scraptitude. It's easy to get caught up on what happened lately. It's a what have you done for me lately sport, but that's the nice thing. When you have comprehensive data sets, you can just kind of look at the long-standing patterns and trajectories, both within the fighter themselves and in comparison to other athletes, like with age, for example, and peaks and declines. So main and co-main event, actually, you're going to be very helpful to me in this regard, Todd, because I know that you pay more attention to organizations outside the UFC, right? From Rising to One to Bellator to all of these places. You go way back to Pride, back when I was still a seed and a thought.
Right.
So Michael Chandler, I mean, I know who he is. I've watched some of his bigger fights, but you probably have a more encompassing view of what he does stylistically, how effective he is with his takedowns and the ability to dictate where the fight takes place. Maybe you can talk to that, his efficacy in that realm.
Well, I mean, I was watching Michael Chandler, and I always liked the original tournament Bellator more than, it was on every Friday night, I believe. So it was on at the same time each week. Each night is very, you'd have to be an idiot not to know when it was on. It's easy to follow. You knew the brackets, who was going to fight next, barring injury, based on who won and lost. And, yeah, I mean, he was a really good wrestler, obviously, in the very beginning. And as he went on, he started to use his hands more. I mean, but that would kind of be getting away from the analytics a little bit because I feel like, maybe he's under pressure to get a big knockout or something in this fight. Maybe he could, just do the takedown thing, but it would leave people like, why do we sign this guy,
I hear you. Simultaneously, I think wrestlers are oftentimes difficult to beat in 3-round fights because in terms of how cardio-intensive grappling can be, they don't have to expend themselves over the course of 5 rounds, and being able to dictate where the fight takes place, it opens up the hands, and it also opens up opportunities for control time, which, while dubious in how it's scored day to day, definitely puts things into your favor. And that's why, of late, I've been leaning a little more towards Michael Chandler compared to where I was. I'm still picking Dan Hooker officially, but looking at Dan Hooker, we want to get into the numbers. This is where I can get into the numbers. You look at his significant strike differential. Well, he gets hit just about as much as he hits people. He's there to be hit, and he relies maybe excessively on his toughness. Michael Chandler, while he's a tough guy, he's been in some wars of attrition. I don't think his goal is to go in there and get hit and mix it up necessarily. I think that's just a byproduct of the sport and fighting guys like Eddie Alvarez, for example, who bring blood with them wherever they go. But Dan Hooker's there to be hit. His takedown defense isn't bad, but it's not stellar. He hasn't fought a long list of guys that excel at taking people down in the UFC. So in terms of trying to judge him by that statistic in isolation, but here's why I like this fight from Mike Chandler numerically. Dan Hooker, he has about average power. He's not a one-hitter quitter type of knockout puncher. And while he's collected some knockdowns throughout his UFC career, he's more of a volume guy at the end of the day. He punching power, he registers 0.5 knockdowns per 100 significant strikes landed. That's about average. So Mike Chandler, who's been questioned for his durability, I don't think that this is the biggest threat for him in that respect. Now, Dan Hooker can put you out. Everybody talks about the knees, and that can be effective against somebody who relies on level changes. But Mike Chandler can play that age-old game of the overhand right versus the level change and keep you guessing. And if he hits them with that overhand right early, I can see him planting Hooker on his butt with regularity in rounds 2 and 3. And if that happens, it's going to be Chandler's fight. In my opinion, I think Chandler's going to play it safe. He has a low margin for error here. 34 years old. He's just out of his prime right now. And I think you can see he doesn't look like he's physically in his prime. But, I mean, still a great athlete. And when you're into the tail end of your prime, like a Jose Aldo, for example, you can still be remarkably effective if you were a plus athlete earlier in your career. So I think that Mike Chandler has juice, and he's going to make this a competitive fight. And it's on Dan Hooker to stop the takedown. If he does that, I think that it's pretty one-sided standing up. He's going to lean on those calf kicks that we've seen him throw. He mixes it up a lot numerically between head, body, and legs. And so if he can keep this fight in the standing realm, he's going to win. But that's a big if.
Now, your stats, have you just been doing the UFC fighters primarily?
Well, the issue is with gathering statistics for a Bellator fighter is I would actually have to watch and catalog all the numbers personally. So it would take me as long to do Mike Chandler's data set as it would for me to do 50 UFC fighters because I'm able to pull and adjust the UFC data such that it's more contextualized, whether that's rate-adjusted statistics, where it combines like a counting number like significant strikes with a time frame. UFC already does that to some extent with per minute. But other things like knockdowns landed per number of significant strikes, things like that, unique data points that aren't available on the UFC website or at least aren't formulated in that way. It's not just easy, it's accessible, and it makes sense to stick to numerically categorizing UFC fighters right now instead of branching out into other organizations like ONE or Bellator or wherever else right now. And that's why it relies almost a lot on the qualitative realm of somebody who knows Mike Chandler as a wrestler and understands where he's at in his last 5 fights, how well he's used his wrestling. I know he's coming off of a big knockout over Ben Henderson. And that's a little bit of a trope there where the lifelong wrestler falls in love with their power. So I'll be curious to see if he's thirsty for the knockout. Like I said, margin for error here with Mike Chandler late in his career. I think that he's just going to try to get a win in this fight.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Now, keeping numbers on Hooker, what are some of the more like interesting numbers you've seen?
Well, Dan Hooker, the only time he's been dropped is by Edson Barbosa, and that's by body shots. So he's a remarkably durable fighter, and that holds up in the statistics. In terms of like what he does on the margins with his takedowns and takedown defense, he's not remarkable in either way, but he does have those assets in his game, which is something I like to see. Dimensionality in a fighter, willingness to take the fight into different realms. It expands your potential of winning a given fight, in my opinion. And I think that's what takes fighters from good to great oftentimes, is having one great area, but marginally being average to above average. And when we get into Dustin Poirier versus Conor McGregor, I think that becomes very relevant. But with Dan Hooker, where he stands out is his durability. And that's why Mike Chandler is going to have to get this fight to the ground, because we saw him eat some bombs from Dustin Poirier and keep his composure. Maybe rocked a little bit, but not in such a way that it made him lose focus or unable to defend himself intelligently. I don't doubt that Chandler hits hard. It's just that Hooker's a guy that can really take it. These dudes in New Zealand and Australia, they're a tough breed out there, and he holds that mantle well. So I would say that's what stands out, because he's not like an outstrike you kind of guy by the numbers, but his toughness allows him to wear guys down and catch them in uncomfortable positions, whether that's with a choke or whether that's with knees, elbows, punches.
Okay, so let's get into Poirier versus McGregor. I mean, by the numbers, maybe kind of break down Poirier first and McGregor second.
Well, the fascinating thing here is statistically, if you go on the UFC website, UFC stats for the fighters, they look remarkably similar. They both land north of 5 significant strikes per minute, or 25 significant strikes per round. They both absorb over 20 significant strikes per round. So they're very similar in terms of output and significant strike defense. McGregor at 55% significant strike defense, Poirier at 54%. And they both like to counterfight a little bit, which is why you'll see that number dip. Among acute counter strikers that also push with aggression, you'll see that lacking significant strike defense simply because they need something to lure you in order to hit you with a more exacting, a more punishing shot. Now, Dustin Poirier, where he fails is within the margins. When you're playing that game of being willing to get hit because you throw with volume and you throw with power, well, how powerful are you? Dustin Poirier, he's above average in terms of punching power, 0.8 knockdowns per 100 significant strikes landed. That's good, but when in comparison to Conor McGregor, he's dwarfed by the 2.3 significant strikes, or 2.3 knockdowns per 100 significant strikes landed. So when you get into these exchanges where guys are trying to bait one another and there's a value exchange, power for power, it shows that McGregor is going to be heavily favored in that realm, which is where both men succeed. I've called Dustin Poirier a bargain bin version of McGregor for this reason. They do a lot of the same things. They do a lot of the same things well, but Conor has an extra level of lethality, and that just makes him transcendent in a way that Dustin Poirier isn't. The other areas, though, Conor McGregor's takedown defense, 10% better. That bodes him. I mean, I think that in a fight with, say, Charles Oliveira or even a rematch with Khabib, he has a higher chance than Dustin Poirier for that exact reason. So that's where the margins are different between the two. Dustin Poirier does take guys down more often, but I don't think that's going to be a relevant factor in this fight. If he tries to take Conor down, I think it's because he's desperate about what's happening when they're standing up.
What did your database, because what numbers did you find that might not be there that the UFC is seeing, or kind of things that you put into your database that maybe they didn't have?
Fighter dominance rating, of course, that's the chief analytics. Sorry to cut you off there, but my elevator pitch, I've been working on it, Todd, since our first discussion. And for those that don't know, FDR is a way of capturing performance removed from your losses. It's a volatile sport. You can win or lose on any given night. It doesn't necessarily define how good you are. For example, Conor's a better fighter than Nate Diaz, but any given night, any fucking thing can happen. You know that, Todd. You've been watching this sport for 30 years now. So FDR-wise, you see the margins between like a Conor McGregor and a Dustin Poirier, between him and a lot of other contenders in this division. And that's because he runs up the tally on strikes, and he's able to knock guys down at an unreal rate. He's in the top 10 percentile in knockdown rate. In terms of what we can do in our database, that's one of the things that we have access to, is the ability to categorize lists of fighters, whether that's by weight class, whether that's the entire roster, whether we're comparing averages of weight classes. We're able to categorize the data according to the different data points. So I can see Conor McGregor's in the top 10% of knockdown rate, or I can see that Dustin Poirier is above average, but he's more in like the top 40% of knockdown rate. Like that's a big difference there. That's a colossal difference. And it really drives home the fact that if these guys are exchanging, Conor McGregor has a massive advantage when that happens. Dustin Poirier's knockdown. Here's one of the areas where Dustin Poirier maybe gains a little bit of where he's thought of as maybe being more susceptible compared to Conor McGregor, but he isn't. Dustin Poirier has only been finished 4 times in his entire career. So his loss by finish rate is actually lower than Conor McGregor, who's been finished 2 times in his career. Because Dustin Poirier has like 26 fights in his UFC career compared to Conor McGregor's 12. And that gets lost on a lot of people is the sample size with McGregor. He hasn't actually logged that much octagon time. There's still a lot of opportunity to flesh out who Conor McGregor is, whether it's greater than is suggested or whether it isn't. And I think we're going to find some of that out tonight. But what we can do, what we can see in the UFC database right here, I would say, is that marginally you look at the data. If you look at the UFC stats, you see Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier is relatively equal. You go to our database, you see the finish rate of Conor McGregor superior. You see the knockdown rate of Conor McGregor far superior. You see the FDR of Conor McGregor notably superior. And you start to understand that there is a substantial margin between these two that goes beyond just the fact that Conor McGregor beat him earlier in their respective careers, which I think is what a lot of people are using in their projections for how this fight is going to go.
Yeah, that's always been the case. I think it's more based on opinion, what feeling Are
Hmm.
they angry this time? Are they not? And I find the numbers thing to be more it takes a lot of emotion out of picking and just looking at data, which I think is very interesting. I think what you're doing is a lot more the way to go. And what I had mentioned, I don't know if you got that, but Sherdog.com, they made a fighter database back in the
Hmm.
1990s. No one had done it, and the guy that was actually created it for him went to college later. They sold the website, and he went to be a rocket scientist, like literally. So he was the guy
Wow,
who had created that database originally.
that's
So
amazing.
what they did was innovative. People would sit on it, and that was how they could learn about fighters that they couldn't see. They could look at
Hmm.
how many knockouts they had, how many submissions they
Absolutely.
had. So what you're doing is along those lines, but much. I think that's the way things should be. I think you're way ahead of what other people are doing.
I
They
mean,
just haven't seen it yet.
I've looked in the field. I mean, you've got Numbers by MMA, which is an Instagram page which does some stuff with data, but uh, I think that a lot of the people that even have the glimmer of the idea that Scraptitude has right now with bringing data to the forefront of the sport and having quantifiable representations of fighter ability, the way we're perceiving it and how we're integrating it the way it's been done in other sports is pretty unique. MMA has a very isolated fan base that like that doesn't seem to take the way it's been used in other sports into the context of MMA. And that's a mistake. Like data-driven decision making permeates all things. It's not just other sports. It's Wall Street. It's dating. It's everywhere. It's found to be the most accurate form of decision making because if you're just looking at the numbers and you're not projecting yourself onto the numbers, it's going to take you to an objective conclusion. And oftentimes, even if that conclusion seems a little odd, if the sample size is there, you're probably going to be wrong, even though you think it's odd, because because the data is taking long-standing patterns that maybe you're not giving enough credit to.
Now, so the data for yours says McGregor wins what? First round, second. I'm assuming based off the numbers you gave me.
I mean, first round, second. I feel like that's almost it's disingenuous to try to get to that point because fights are so volatile. And the purpose of bringing numbers into the sport is because of the volatility and how easy it is to get caught up in one sequence, one skill set, one fight. So I don't like to do it by the round.
Hmm.
In terms of getting knocked out, I think Dustin was a little more fragile when he was at featherweight. That's not necessarily, I haven't done a split from his featherweight career compared to his lightweight career, knockdowns absorbed and things like that. But I do think he was a little more fragile, the way that he took shots from Korean Zombie, who's a hard hitter in his own right, the way he took shots from Conor. But his outside of that Michael Johnson knockout, he's been very he gets rocked a lot, I'll say that, but he has the ability to recover. He's been a durable fighter at lightweight, so I don't want to sell him short. The thing about Conor McGregor, though, is it's like for Francis Ngannou or somebody else, like you can, or Cody Garbrandt, like you can be a Rafael Asunciao, somebody that's traditionally very durable, very savvy, and then you get hit by that nuclear shot by this guy who hits unlike anybody else that you're going to face, and you know that is what that is, and that I think that's what I see with this fight here. Conor McGregor's power, quantifiably, is superior to that of Dustin Poirier. The numbers back up my idea that they do a lot of the same things and how they fight. They like to pressure, but they also like to draw out counter opportunities. They both like to fight long. But Dustin Poirier, he gives up ground more than Conor McGregor does. We'll have a stat for that someday, like aggression rate. The UFC does some things like that for who's moving forward versus who's moving backwards, like who's controlling the center of the octagon. And those are fascinating concepts right there because undoubtedly Conor McGregor would school Dustin Poirier in that category. And that's what it's going to be come this fight, is Dustin Poirier is not going to control the center of the octagon. Conor McGregor is. Conor's going to dictate this fight through his power. I don't know how Dustin Poirier approaches it. He can prolong it through any number of means, takedowns, trying to clinch, lower output, but Conor has a way of drawing what he wants out of people, and that's probably what's going to happen here. That's not an opinion. That's just what's happened over the course of his career to 10 out of 12 opponents. Actually, you could say 11 out of 10, 12 opponents because Nate Diaz was in the fight that he wanted before Nate Diaz won that fight in the UFC. So That's just what I see. Dustin gets hit a lot.
Now, when you release your database, which is in February, what day is it?
15th,
Okay.
and that's going to include 2 new statistics, as well as men and women's splits.
So you don't want to give away what the statistics are yet?
Oh, I'm happy to.
Okay.
I'm happy to. I'm already, the intellectual property is already filed for. It's not, you know me. I take this shit real serious. Like Godfather, like in terms of litigation, in terms of self-acclaim, I got all of it, Todd. But what we're incorporating is statistics that are based on capturing durability. So some of what I'm talking to you about here is using these statistics that aren't available to the public yet. Those include loss by finish rate, and that includes knockdown absorption rate. So knockdown absorption rate kind of flips knockdown rate on its head, and it's basically how many strikes a fighter gets knocked down by per 100 significant strikes absorbed. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, that, and then loss by finish rate is just the percentage of their losses by finish. Percentage is a much better way to go by a fighter's record in the UFC than just the strict win and loss tally, in my opinion. I mean, because somebody can be because somebody can be 20-2, or somebody can be 10-2, or what I'm trying to say here is that, like, understanding the breakdown percentage-wise of how somebody performs, their finish rate, their win rate, and their loss rate gives a much clearer picture as to who they are as a fighter. You can then cross-reference those things with other data points like your FDR or like your knockdown rate, and then you start to get a picture where you can paint a composite view of this fighter without ever seeing them fight. That's kind of the brilliant thing about it. And what I'm coming to realize through charting these new statistics here, knockdown absorption rate and loss by finish rate, is durability is the best ability. Nothing else like it. Durability, and that's why I wanted to quantify this, and I'm trying to find other ways to quantify cardio, because maybe that has to do with strikes landed in the third round and on in fights, something like that. Still figuring that out, but durability and cardio are 2 of the key advantages, and, well, maybe that gives Dustin a glimmer of hope, being more durable and supposedly having better cardio at lightweight. But I think if this fight goes into later rounds, Conor's actually going to surprise people with his endurance. He looks fantastic, and I think he's fully acclimated to the weight class.
Now, you're going to release it like where? You're going to release it on a website, or you're going to...
I'm sorry. The way to get access to the website, you can just download me. Right now, it's all on spreadsheet, or DM me. It's all on spreadsheets. We don't have it up on an official website yet because they're living documents, and therefore I need somebody that's heady with all the software to link my spreadsheets to a website such that I add it and it comes up on the website. That's above my base of knowledge. I'm trying to pioneer mixed martial arts analytics. I can't simultaneously figure out how to code. So right now it's all in a database, numerous pages. You've got breakdowns by our entire roster, by a minimum of 10 fights, by a minimum of 5 fights, so you can have a threshold of sample size. We also have the breakdowns for a split between men and women are coming soon. We have averages per weight class, so you can see things like, average significant strikes landed per round per weight class, or knockdown rate per weight class, finish rate per weight class. All that stuff. So you can play around with the data. You can organize it, in terms of low to high, high to low, such that you can play around with these data sets and get a really good feeling for what matters and what doesn't. And that's why with something like FDR, fighter dominance rating, as an example, you go and you chart that, you organize it. Well, sure, there's a couple weird names that stand out that you can root out by cross-referencing it with another data point or 2. But you see, boom, 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 boom. Damn, all those guys are really fucking good who are popping on FDR. And that it gives legitimacy to the statistics inherently by being able to organize things like that, which is something you can't do on the UFC website.
Tell me maybe a fighter you're a little surprised by when you were doing all your compilations who maybe popped on the statistics that you weren't thinking of.
Well, I can tell you guys that I'm attracted to because of it. Magomed Ankalaev right now, for fighters with at least 5 fights in the UFC, is topping our fighter dominance rating. I love Magomed Ankalaev. But a guy where maybe it's failing us a little bit is Renato Moicano. And the reason it's failing us is because the metric does not factor for durability. Moicano seems to have an issue with absorbing shots. He's been knocked out in, 2 of his last 3? And that is what it is. But he's also had really good performances against Calvin Kattar. He was looking great against Brian Ortega for a lot of their fight before kind of getting out-pressured, outworked, and shooting for an ill-advised takedown. But the guy does a lot of things well. As I said, durability is the best ability. And if you can't take the shots coming back at you, it doesn't matter how technically proficient you are, how good you are in all elements of the game. You got to be able to take the punishment. I don't have the whole list, the whole FDR list in front of me right at this second. But listen, anybody that's watching this, you can slide into my DMs on Instagram at Timothy E. Lewis or on Twitter at Timothy E. Lewis. You can find Scraptitude You can find Scraptitude on Twitter. You DM them, just say, hey, man, here's my Gmail. I want access to the database. I'll hit you with it. And whether you like it or not, you can tune in. You can see the upgrades because that's going to keep happening. So far, all the fights that have happened up to Magny versus Chiesa, all of it's been categorized in our database. We have about 190 fighters right now. So that's at least the top 15 in every weight class. And if there's somebody there that you want to see that has 5 or more fights, you let me know. I'll add them. I'm happy to. I want to see everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty incredible. And, maybe let some people know what you're doing. And I know you just mentioned kind of where they can follow you and kind of what some of your plans are for the future.
Yeah, well, Todd, God, it's a wild ride, man. And having you here to talk about it, having you interested in it, means a lot because the sport has a lot of OGs. And that's probably a thing about us, or that's the thing about sports in general, that are resistant to analytics, that are resistant to the new ways of thinking, that get addicted to the traditions. And they capture themselves in that tradition, and they have distaste for new ways of doing things, as if it discredits their own experience. But you're here just for the ride, and you want to see where this crazy train goes, and I fucking love that.
Well, I mean, I watched Moneyball because you mentioned it. I had heard of the movie before, but I had never watched it, and it made sense, what the guy was doing. Now, I know they didn't win a championship, but the stuff he was doing was working. Mm-hmm. Would you even, I was going to ask, would you even consider getting, cheaper fighters that could sell similar amounts of pay-per-views like they did to win games?
Yeah.
Almost like a financial analytic,
Well, I think that the UFC, there's a lot of different ways that this could go. I think it's great for fans, and that's what I'm making it for right now, is just so we, the fans and analysts, have a baseline way to compare our thoughts. Because right now, Twitter can be a toxic place. Instagram can be a toxic place because everybody has their opinions, and it's the Wild West out there. There's no way to standardize anything. And I want to at least create a baseline of conversation with what we're doing here. But you mentioned to me Max Holloway, and him mentioning output and how that works, and designing a game plan around certain statistical points that allowed him to exploit the flaws of Calvin Kattar. And Max Holloway isn't that fast of a starter, but some of the insights that he gleaned from analytics allowed him to approach the fight differently and maybe put on the best performance of his career. I would say so. A lot of smart people would have told you that's a tough fight for Max. So that's really interesting to me that he's he's not just any fighter, he's one of the premier fighters in the sport doing it. I also think the UFC has a use for it, in terms of matchmaking and determining who's good and who isn't good. And I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they have some behind the scenes ways that they analyze fighters and do matchmaking that isn't available to the public. I don't know entirely. And lastly, I think that this is going to be a huge thing for people that are in the betting field, the gamblers out there trying to make money on fights, because having access to more information is what you want when you're trying to gain a competitive edge. And I see no reason why this can't help you. Honestly, it just recently, the Rob Font versus Marlon Moraes fight. Yeah, you could have been like, okay, Marlon Moraes has lost a couple of his last fights, but Rob Font wasn't a big name. and a lot of the odds were even. I think Marlon Moraes was a slight favorite there. A lot of people expected Marlon to get back on track with that fight. But the data said, wow, Rob Font's never been knocked down in his career. Rob Font lands at a higher rate than Marlon Moraes. He has a substantial knockdown rate. He just has all these tools. And then you look at the fighter dominance rating, superior to Marlon Moraes, and it's like, shit. Like, my first
I'm walking, sorry.
Yeah, no, but my first instinct wasn't the right instinct. And as I went through the numbers, I actually ended up giving some recommendations to some people to pick Rob Font in that one, and they made themselves some money. I never would have done that if I didn't look through the numbers.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you taking the time. It's really cool to hear you talk about this stuff. And can you let people kind of know, where to follow you and stuff like that?
Of course. I just got a text. Sorry, I just got a text from my girlfriend. She's like, "You're doing great, boo. Just cover up." Oh. Is that a robe?
Yeah, I was wondering what that was too. I was going to ask you. You're wearing a robe,
man. I've got some people coming over tonight. This is actually my downtime. I've been running errands, doing stuff all day, and so this is my opportunity to relax and talk to you. So it's been a reprieve for me, and she's tuning in, so I love that. Because she's not a fan of the sport, but she's a fan of me.
That's right, man. This is going to grow you. Because, like I said, I'm a believer in what you're doing. I'm not just doing this just to do it. I believe in what you're doing and that it's going to be kind of revolutionary,
Well, you're the fucking man, Todd. You're an OG in the sport, and you're, the fact that you're on this, it gives me a lot of hope because I've received pushback, but I'm also stubborn in what I do. And having an OG like you here taking a real interest means something to me. Now, in terms of plugging myself, I'm Timothy. Well, Scraptitude on Instagram. Y'all don't want to follow me on Instagram. That shit ain't exciting. But you do want to follow me on Twitter at Timothy E. Lewis. I'm wilding out over there. You want to follow Scraptitude on Twitter as well. And then you want to follow or subscribe to Scraptitude Philly on YouTube. We are branching out with our content on YouTube. Jeff, the man of the people, and my podcast co-host, just put out a McGregor versus Poirier preview. I recommend folks checking it out. And we also put our first ever YouTube Tim's Tea there, and that's summarizing the fights that are happening tonight and giving my takes on those. You can also find that on the Scraptitude Instagram. Lastly, I would love it, love it, if you all gave a read to the article pinned to my profile on Twitter. That is Scraptitude brings you the FDR, something like that, introducing Scraptitude's FDR. And it talks about fighter dominance rating, what it means, and the chain of events that's happening with analytics and mixed martial arts, where we're at right now, what the critics are saying, and where we can go in the future. I believe if you read that article, you'll really see where I'm coming from. And, if you don't, we don't have to see eye to eye. I'm going to do my shit.
Oh, I'm definitely going to send it to some people. I was already, going to send it to some trainers that I know.
Oh, that's fucking cool, man. I'm
going to send them this interview. Yeah, so I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're busy, but I'm the first OG believer, hopefully.
The first OG. I'm going to give you that title. The first OG believer.
Yeah.
Todd Atkins, everybody. The Todd Atkins Show. And we're not going to forget that. Now, I do want to ask, though, Todd, because you made this very much so about me, and your patience listening to me talk is remarkable. And speaking of my girlfriend, she does not have your patience listening to me. I'm surprised you tuned in. I'm just kidding. I love you, boo. But I wanted to hear your picks for this fight, the Chandler versus Hooker fight, and the McGregor versus Poirier fight, and maybe any other upsets or picks that you have tonight.
Well, I was just focused on the two matches. I agree with you. I think Hooker probably wins.
Okay.
Poirier, these are things that numbers don't get. So I was trying to focus on numbers, for the interview. There's always these other factors, but I feel like he has some momentum. You know what I mean?
Oh, 100%.
Maybe that.
Momentum.
Like real. A sports team that has momentum. Just like the Moneyball, right? They were doing terrible. Then they start winning. What they were doing was working. Maybe they started believing it was working. He does have some momentum. So,
he's a different guy.
I wouldn't be shocked if he won, but I would expect McGregor to beat him again.
You expect him to be? Do you think that he's going to knock him out? Or do you think it goes?
Oh yeah, I mean, if McGregor wins, I think he wins by knockout. If he doesn't get the knockout, he'd probably lose down the road of the fight.
Okay, yeah, because interesting. So you think it goes finish either way?
Poirier seems like an emotional fighter, you know. The more confident he gets,
the
longer he stays in. He likes to drag people into war. The longer it goes, it's more kind of maybe to his way of winning. Usually, he doesn't beat people in the first round most of the time.
Now that Holloway win is going to age very well for him because Holloway is an absolute stud.
Yeah,
he's not a 155er, but he's an absolute stud. But these fights with Eddie Alvarez, these fights with Justin Gaethje and Dan Hooker, they are perfect stylistic matchups for Dustin Poirier to do what he does. None of them are going to out-wrestle him. I know Eddie Alvarez can wrestle, but he doesn't. He hasn't wrestled like since he fought Anthony Pettis. I mean, Justin Gaethje is one of the most hittable guys in the sport. I know he fucked up Tony Ferguson. Styles make fights. Tony's on the wrong side of 30 and definitely the downswing of his career. You know, it's just favorable stylistic matchups where he's the bigger puncher each and every time in those fights. Some people will argue that Gaethje is. I don't think that's the truth. The numbers don't bear that out. And now against Conor, well, Conor's going to do to him what Dustin's been doing to these guys, but cleaner and in a more punishing fashion.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to focus on. I wanted you to tell me, okay, what do the numbers say? I wanted to take emotion out of it.
Because
the way you're going, I think is the most interesting way to do this long term. Because most people, if you watch these shows, they're going off of what they think is going to happen based off of factors. They think this or they think that.
Oh, tell me about it, Todd. Tell me about it. And it's like, you know, I throw a lot of shade at film grinders. I watch a ton of fight film. I have UFC Fight Pass. I watch a fuckload of fights. Like, people think that I'm just like some fucking nerd pressing buttons and never watching fights. Like, I've trained. I've gotten my head all types of knocked around. I've participated in a variety of martial arts, and I watch the shit out of this. I love all parts of this sport. But this he said, she said feelings and fan-driven picks. Like, I love, for example, Juice, Aaron Jackson with the Fighting With Myself podcast. He's a name in the MMA Twitter sphere. He says straight up, I don't analyze these fights anymore. I just pick who I like, who I'm riding with, who I want to win. And I love that he's able to just put himself aside and do that, because a lot of folks won't, like, it's too personal for them. It's too representative for themselves. They're too tied up into it. Like, they need to be right, not just because of the fight itself, but because their identity is like interwoven. It's weird. It gets really weird how emotionally driven it is. I agree with that, but it is an emotional sport, and I've got guys that I really fucking like that I want to see win. That is true.
Yeah, but you know, when I bring up like momentum, maybe it doesn't matter. You know,
no, it absolutely matters.
I feel like doing it by the numbers is taking away all this intangible stuff, and just tell me what the numbers say. You know, because momentum is an intangible.
But you know? Momentum matters, and you can say Dustin Poirier has momentum. I think Tyson Fury had a great quote about this. It's all about being in form. He's like, right now I'm in form. I just went 2 fights back-to-back with the hardest puncher on the planet. I knocked him out last fight. I'm in form. I'm looking great. Anthony Joshua, he has not looked himself in his last couple of fights. He's not in form right now. And there is something to that. Confidence matters, because when you're confident, and I can't quantify this, I'm willing to admit that, but when you're confident, there's less second guessing of your decision making. And when you're fighting, you just need to be reacting. You need to be pulling the trigger instantaneously. And if you're a second slow, if you're doubting yourself, if you're trying to be cerebral in fight and outthinking the opponent, you're already being outthought if they're operating based on their training, based on their muscle memory. All of the work is done before fight night. And so what Conor does is he's kind of a momentum buster, because he gets people in their heads and takes them off their confidence. He's also a one-man momentum train, in that he's able to get himself mentally before a fight, like, in a place where he's on top of the world. It's very unique to him. Dustin Poirier, if you look at the numbers, well, the winning percentage is there for him in terms of momentum, but significant strike differential. He's taken a lot of shots. He's lost a lot of rounds. He's been rocked a lot of times. I understand that he's probably confident that he's beaten legitimate guys, but he also has to know that those guys have hit him and those guys have hurt him, and Conor is admittedly the hardest puncher he's ever faced in his career. That's in there somewhere.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, this fight, they're kind of going in. There isn't as much head games, though. They seem to be all friendly and,
Yeah, but, maybe like now I'm getting out of the quantifiable round. I think Conor's just maturing.
Yeah, I think so, too.
I think he does respect Dustin, and I think that Conor has some stuff going on legally that's kind of behind the scenes right now, and keeping a clean public image behooves him.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Like, we saw Conor get all church boy after some of those allegations, those sexual allegations. He like flipped a switch into like charity and kindness, and people are multifaceted. I don't have judgment to levy on anybody that way. I'll tell you what, I think Conor's going to knock that boy silly inside too.
Well, that's good, man. I mean, appreciate, I think that's good to end it on. Your statistics say Conor in 2.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for having me, Todd. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you taking the time.
Todd Atkins Show fans, listeners, everybody that's been on your show. I had a great time. You're a fantastic at guiding these things, man. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Tim.
Yep. Enjoy the fights, man.
You too. Take care.